Welcome to the Museum of the Jewish People at Beit Hatfutsot. Here, we believe and try to tell the unique and ongoing story of the Jewish people. We believe that you are part of the story as well. Welcome to Operation Moses, 30 years after. 6 years ago, the Museum of the Jewish People launched a special initiative. We selected photographs taken by Doron Bacher, our in-house photographer in the 1980s. In these photographs, he documented Ethiopian Jews immigrating, coming, and landing in Israel for the first time. We put them on Facebook and asked people to see if they can identify themselves, their parents, or their grandparents. Our videographer, Orly Malesa, from the community, went to the people who identified themselves or family members and asked them the very simple question: how is life in Israel 30 years later? She collected the testimonials and produced a wonderful exhibition from the documentary films that she produced, and it can be seen here via the link below. In these movies, we can see moments of triumph, moments of great hardship, but mostly what we can see is life in its complexity.
Operation Moses was the code name for the secret airlift that brought around 7,000 Ethiopian Jews to Israel in 1984 to 1985. The code name was chosen because this modern-day exodus was seen as like Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt. Beit Hatfutsot, the Museum of the Jewish People, documented the exodus from Ethiopia as it happened. Our photographer Doron Bacher spent many months chronicling the experiences of the Ethiopian Jews airlifted to Israel. The result is a unique treasure trove of 10,000 photographs. 30 years after Operation Moses, Beit Hatfutsot, in partnership with young Ethiopian leaders, began exploring ideas for a new exhibition. We wanted to celebrate the heroism of Ethiopian Jews and explore the triumphs and hardships of their lives in Israel. The Museum of the Jewish People invited Ethiopian Jews to re-examine the photographs and to recall those remarkable life-changing times. The response was overwhelming. A Facebook page showcasing the photos enabled many Ethiopian Jews to see themselves, their families, their fathers and mothers, as they embarked upon their epic journey to become Israeli. For many, these were the first photos ever taken of themselves. The filmmaker Orly Malesa, who herself came to Israel as part of Operation Moses, met with them. The outcome is 10 beautiful and poignant films in which Ethiopian Jews tell their own stories. Some have flourished in Israel, creating new homes, taking new opportunities, finding a deep sense of belonging. But others tell stories of disruption and loss. For them, the trauma of leaving Ethiopia is still painful.
You know, you don't change. Like, you evolve, but you're always the same person. A picture it says a lot of things. And it's not just a picture. You know, there's a story. I guess there's a story to every picture.
זה יום החתונה. זה משמעות הכי גדולה שיש. אחרי שנולדו לנו 5 ילדים. התחילו בינינו לחילוקי דעות, אי הבנה. בשנת 2005 התגרשנו. אם היינו באתיופיה, סביר להניח, כל החילוקי דעות שקרו פה לא יכלו לקרות. זה ההורים שלי. אני מקנא בהם. הם החזיקו 70 שנה. התמונה שלי נשארה תמונה.
אני מתרגש. זה ההיסטוריה שלי, כילד. מצביע יפה. התמונה הראשונה בארץ כעולה חדש, מזכרת מכיתה א'. אני נשוי למור, שהיא לא אתיופית, היא חצי תימניה, חצי ספרדיה. ההורים שלי מאוד שמחו, וגם ציפו לרגע הזה לראות אותה. אחרי שהם ראו אותה, התאהבו בה, והם עדיין מאוהבים בה עד עכשיו. לגבי ההורים של אשתי היה קצת בעיה, הם בעיקר הכירו אותנו מהטלוויזיה. שהוא עשה להי ככה, שהוא עשה ככה, שהוא נכנס לכלא, שהוא אין לו מה לאכול. ואשתי לא ויתרה. וזהו, עד שהם בסוף הכירו אותי. ואחרי שהם הכירו, הם פתאום מבינים שזה לא משנה מי אתה, מה אתה, חשוב שתהיה בן אדם, וזה לא משנה אם אתה שחור, או לבן, תימני, מרוקאי, הבן אדם. היום אני די-ג'יי באירועים, רוב הקהל שלי זה קהל אתיופי. אצלנו בעדה המוזיקה זה הדבר הכי חשוב. החתונה נקבעת בה לפי המוזיקה.
አባቴ ከሆሎን ከህዳን ሰጥቶ ደስተኛ አልነበረም። ስለዚህ በስራ በኩል መስሪያ ቤት ሄዶ ተሰሚነት ስላጣ የብቸኝነትና ዲካው ነው የሚመስለኝ። አሁን ልጅ ዋናና ሚሆን ከሆነ ወደ ሀገሬ ወደ ኢትዮጵያ ለመመለስ ፍላጎት አለኝ። እንዴት እዚህ ደረጃ የነበርኩ ሰው እኔ አሁን ይሄ ነገር እኔ አይስማማኝም። አንድ ነገር መፈጠር አለብኝ። ገመድ ዞኖ ህይወቱን ያጠፋ ገመድ ዞ
נולדתי באתיופיה. עד גיל 7 שהיינו שם, והעיסוק שלי העיקרי היה רועה צאן. הנה אני פה. אני חושב 2 או פחות בארץ. אני קב"ן במילואים מזה 7 שנים, וזה כל המשמעויות של חיילים שהם זקוקים למענה נפשי. אם אני מסתכל איפה התחלתי, מה הייתה נקודת הפתיחה שלי, אז כן אפשר להגיד סוג של הצלחה. יש הרבה מה לעשות ולאן לשאוף ולאן להגיע, כדי להגיד שמיציתי את מה שיכולתי בתפקידי בעולם הזה.
This groundbreaking exhibition enables Ethiopian Jews to tell their own stories in their own voices. These are remarkable accounts of Ethiopian Jews leaving the world they knew and coming to a land they had dreamed about and suffered for. It shows them connecting to and confronting Israeli society without sugarcoating the painful realities or resorting to cynical accusations. Ethiopian Jews and an Ethiopian Israeli filmmaker have created a loving, intimate portrayal of a people and their enormous contribution to the state of Israel and to the Jewish people. Beit Hatfutsot, the Museum of the Jewish People, is dedicated to telling the Jewish story, both past and present. We are proud to present this unique exhibition.
When we at the Museum of the Jewish People at Beit Hatfutsot say that we're all part of the story, that applies to our galleries as well. The Jewish lens, exhibited here all year round, is the product of the work of young Jews from all over the world. In the exhibition, there are 20 pictures taken by young people from over 20 countries who were asked to photograph themselves Jewishly, to photograph their connections and relationships to the Jewish people from all possible angles, be it language, land, Jewish daily life as they see it, their values, collective memories, or Jewish culture and creativity. It all works. Enjoy. Make Good, taken by Sophie Altman of Hebrew High of Buffalo, New York, USA. Sophie photographed a wall in downtown Buffalo as the standout phrase compels her to make good. Like Tikkun Olam, art can repair the world and bring people together through peace. It encourages people to be nicer to each other and spread happiness in a world of hate. This photo, called Kotel, was taken by Shachar Oren of Chof HaSharon High School, Shfaim, Israel. And he writes, "At the Western Wall in Jerusalem, I witnessed a great moment of brotherhood as people rushed to the aid of a worker who dropped Bibles onto the wet floor. One of the biggest values in Judaism is acts of love and kindness. Jews unite as a people and strive to help one another, regardless of the cause." Soccer has no barriers. Aaron Bechar Haber, Centro Deportivo Israelita, Mexico City, Mexico. In this picture, Aaron demonstrates his love for Israel and for soccer. The two jerseys are used to represent the integration of the Mexico team and the Israel Maccabi Tel Aviv team into one, as both of them depict components of his identity, being both Jewish and Mexican. Lantern, taken by Anat Pisetsky of Congregation Bet Shalom, Northbrook, Illinois, USA. She writes, "As we set adrift our lantern into the sky, we also set adrift our wishes. At camp, we learn to be Jewish leaders. We watch the lantern drift into the fading sky, hoping we will transform into the leaders we want to be." Welcome to Capturing History, where we tell the unique story of the photographer David Shimon, or Shim, or David Seymour, three names for one photographer who was born in Warsaw in 1911 and killed in the Sinai Desert in 1956. The story of his life is seen through his photographs showing political activism in Europe in the 1930s, the Second World War, where he lost most of his family, the rebuilding of Europe in the late 1940s and the beginning of the 1950s, through pictures of celebrities from all over the world, and at the end, in Israel. In this photo, taken in Paris of the 1930s, we already see two passions of Shim in his photography. From the moment he picks up a camera, political activism is a major part of his work. He documents artists, political workers, and whoever sets out to demonstrate and to make their voices heard. Another passion of Shim is documenting children. And here we see a child raising a fist of resistance on her father's shoulders in a demonstration in Paris. Shim documented many wars, but he never romanticized them. In this picture, from the Spanish Civil War of the late 1930s, we see children in a bunker, and we have no thoughts as to the grandeur of war. It is violent, it is dark, and Shim is there to show us that, and more importantly, to show us how it treats the weakest in our society. One of the most amazing aspects in Shim's art and photography is his profound humanism and compassion. In this photograph, we see two German children walking around Berlin, the older brother looking at the Brandenburg Gate, now destroyed. Shim's entire family, except for his sister, were killed during World War II. And yet, when coming to Berlin of Nazi Germany, he still finds compassion in his heart to look inside the children's eyes and see how they see Berlin, how they see that gate. Following the war and with American investment in Europe, we see many Hollywood actors coming to Europe and filming their movies. Here, we see Kirk Douglas in Versailles, enjoying life. In 1951, Shim comes to Israel for the first time and falls in love with it. Being a socialist and a socialist Jew, he falls in love with the young socialist Jewish state. Here we see him doing something he has rarely, if ever, done before, taking a picture of a soldier, but with a clear romantic twist to it. A female soldier looking over her shoulder. She looks confident and whimsical. In 1956, war breaks out between Israel and Egypt, and Shim knows exactly where he should be. He goes, as always, to document the weak, the meek, the poor. Here we see a picture of a boy, an Egyptian boy, looking scared in an Egyptian tank. In other photos from that war, we will see families looking for food and shelter. In the end, Shim died in that war, gunned down by Egyptian soldiers who thought he was the enemy. Welcome to our family gallery of heroes, trailblazers of the Jewish people. Here in the gallery, you can find 148 heroes and heroines of the Jewish people, past and present, from Israel and from Jewish communities from around the world. You can find many different types of heroes, because a hero does not just mean someone who is strong and brave. A hero is also someone who can look at challenges and obstacles in front of them and overcome them, like the difficulties we're all experiencing today, right? Sitting at home all day, with the family, that's tough, we know. You can find information about the heroes through the Beit Hatfutsot app. On the app, you go to the Heroes menu, and there you can read about many of our trailblazers. Are you ready? Let's go!
Hello, my name's Abigail. I'm in 9th grade science class, the only girl in a class of boys. So for all those who want to know why I still take this class, this project about my favorite scientist is for you. Only this scientist is just like me. She's a woman. Her name was Rosalind Franklin. Born in England in 1920, as a young girl she was told she should be a seamstress or teacher. She chose to study science and excelled at it. During the Second World War, she volunteered as an air raid warden. By age 25, she was a researcher in Paris. Then, she was invited to England to a distinguished laboratory. But she found working there very difficult. It was very unfriendly to women researchers and Jews, and she was both. Even the canteen was for men only. She would have constant arguments with Wilkins, the director of the laboratory. Rosalind studied DNA. Today we know how to read DNA, to understand what we're made of, but in those days very little was known about it. Once she had discovered the DNA structure, it became a dear friend. In another part of the same laboratory, two scientists, Watson and Crick, were attempting to build a model of the DNA structure. They asked Rosalind to take a look, and she pointed out all the mistakes that they had made. Rosalind decided to move to New York, where she began research in other fields. After she'd left, Wilkins showed her rivals a valuable X-ray from her research without her knowledge. With this information, they were able to quickly build an accurate model of the DNA structure. Rosalind died at the age of 38, probably as a result of exposure to dangerous materials. After her death, Watson and Crick received the Nobel Prize for their research on DNA. They never bothered to mention Rosalind or her work. Over the past years, we're beginning to realize that without Rosalind's research, we would know very little about DNA today. There is some justice in knowing that Rosalind is now recognized for her invaluable work.
Live from Stockholm, where the 1997 Nobel Prize in Physics is about to be awarded. This year's Nobel laureate in physics is Claude Cohen-Tanouji, a Jewish-French physicist born in Algiers.
Are you listening, Claude? If you look closely, you'll see that even in complete darkness, there is a speck of light. For the Talmud teaches us that God exists in the smallest of details. Study, search, and share your knowledge. For this is the essence and wisdom of Jewish tradition.
The 1997 Nobel Prize in Physics is awarded to Claude Cohen-Tanouji, who together with his multinational team of researchers developed methods to trap an atom's tiniest particles with laser light.
Daddy, what is Spinoza?
He was a philosopher.
What is a philosopher?
A philosopher is a person who is curious about what everything around us means. They want to know why we behave the way we do, for example, or ask, where does God exist?
Isn't God in heaven?
That depends who you ask. Spinoza, for instance, was curious about perception, about the way we see things around us and how we interpret and think about them. He thought that God exists in nature, not in the heavens above, but rather in every little detail that surrounds us here on earth.
You mean in me and in you too?
Yes, but Spinoza also wanted to bring all mankind together. Now, this was 300 years ago, and people were very conservative and stubborn. You wouldn't believe the things people said about him, especially when, as a Jew, he wanted to study with Christians. He believed that love and kindness must triumph over hate, and that it is for the people to decide what is good and right. It isn't a choice to be left to God. He thought that every person had the right to choose what he believed in. Of course, when the great rabbis of the time heard this, they excommunicated him. But Spinoza didn't give up. He continued to believe in what he thought was true, and eventually he won. The things that he believed in that were considered unacceptable back then are accepted all over the world today. Now he is considered to be a great and wise philosopher. Even Albert Einstein here said that he believed that God exists the way Spinoza explained.
Daddy, who was Albert Einstein?
I can see this is going to take a while.
Our story begins in Lisbon 500 years ago. Not only for Jews was this a dark time, for even the brightest of women were forbidden to shine. Dona Garcia Mendez was such a woman, a young widow and a Jew. She managed a company trading in spice and saffron, a successful merchant and a career mom. But the church had the power to demand that as a Jew her faith she must recant. This was something Donna could not do, so to Belgium she fled to begin anew. There she was renowned, respected and revered. Her business flourished, trading far and near. With her sister now partner by her side, they established a bank and continued to thrive. The king of the lowlands in their affairs did pry, eager for their wealth, to take it he tried. Yet shrewd Donna would not give in, took her riches and sailed with the wind. In Venice she could live and trade freely, for there as equals they treated the Jews. She became known as Donna Nasi, which means leader or president in Hebrew. Whenever Donna spoke, men would listen. She commanded a merchant fleet, ransomed innocent in prison, translated the Bible with such a sharp mind into Ladino, the language Jews spoke at the time. The Turkish Sultan was sincerely impressed. He admired her so that he invited her to his address. When her ship moored at his famous city, he gave her a crown and treated her like royalty. Donna lent money and funded the Sultan's wars. She even helped the needy, the frail, and the poor. As for her fellow Jews who still had no home, she leased the city of Tiberias to call it their own. The poets have written many a song and tale of this great woman who never made it to Israel. A humble Jew from Lisbon, she moved mountains to pave her way, and we are grateful for Tiberias, where she is remembered to this day.
So, just as a reminder, the Museum of the Jewish People at Beit Hatfutsot's slogan is, "You are part of the story." I'm inviting you to download 2 apps which will allow you to be more connected to the story. One app is that of the museum, which includes information about synagogues and heroes and other galleries. The second app is the Beit Hatfutsot Challenge app, which has dozens of games which you can not only play when you come to visit us here, but ones that you can play at home while looking at our short films. The Zabludov synagogue was built using only wood, without any nails or any other sort of metal. This synagogue has a beautiful folklore story attached to it, showing us the importance of synagogues to Jewish communities throughout history. It is told at one time a fire started in the synagogue, and a flock of birds came from all the woods around it to quell down the fire. This beautiful reconstructed ceiling is of the Chodorov synagogue in the Ukraine. At the center, we see a two-headed eagle, which symbolizes both the Austro-Hungarian Empire and also the Jewish God. Around it, we see the zodiac. And around the zodiac, the symbol for time, we see a myriad symbols of folklore, both Polish and Jewish, conveying how no Jewish community lives in a bubble, and we're all constantly interfacing with the cultures around us, taking and giving back to them. On the bottom tier, we have pictures of animals from lands far, far away. This ceiling, painted during the 18th century, wanted to show that the Jews of this community knew what was going on in the outside world. And so we have their view of the world: God, time, the community, and then the outside world. Welcome to the Hallelujah Gallery. Assemble, pray, study. In this gallery, we display dozens of synagogues from around the world, from different times in history. We see that the synagogue is not just a place of worship or a place that deals with a personal connection to God. It is also a place that connects people. A synagogue shows how a community builds itself and how they choose to display themselves to the outside world. Looking back, we're able to learn a lot about a community by studying the structure of the synagogue, its interior, and the different parts of the synagogue. Dura Europos is a 2nd century synagogue located in what is today the borderline between Syria and Iraq. Back then, it was the borderline between the major empires of the time, the Roman Hellenistic Empire to the west and the Persian Empire to the east. In this beautiful mural, we see something that we don't usually associate with synagogues. We see painting, we see color, and we see a lot of human figures. But actually, this is very much a synagogue. And we can see that with the fact that all of the different stories are stories taken from Hebrew scripture. And so, for example, the story of the birth of Moses is here, along with Exodus and Moses in the burning bush. Other stories concerning biblical figures like Elijah, King David and Jacob, and holidays like Purim. This beautiful synagogue shows us the importance of Jewish memory. Built in the 18th century in the Caribbean, it's a beautiful, luxurious building built by a thriving, educated community of rich merchants who came from Amsterdam but are originally from Spain and Portugal. After being expelled from there more than 250 years before the establishment of this synagogue, they wandered the earth until coming to the Caribbean and establishing this community. Here, they build a lavish synagogue, but at the floor of the synagogue is sand. The sand is there to remind them of two distinct Jewish communal memories. One is of their forefathers in Spain and Portugal, the Moranos, Anusim, Jews who lived as Christians, but actually underground lived Jewish life. And in order to do a bat mitzvah or a bar mitzvah, to read the Torah or perform a Jewish wedding, they would have to go down to the basement or up into the attic. To avoid prying ears, they would put sand on the floor so that the Inquisition wouldn't know what they're doing in the middle of the night. Another memory they want to conserve is a memory that all of us have in common, the memory of Exodus and of wandering in the desert. And that is how we see a Jewish story, a Jewish memory, coded into the very fabric of a modern building. There is perhaps no better example of the museum for the complexity of Jewish life than the German synagogue in Venice, which was established already after the establishment of the ghetto in the Italian city. In 1521, the Venetian Senate, afraid of the rising class of Jewish merchants at the city, devises a plan to have a ghetto where they will keep all the Jews during the night with many restrictions. But even with all of these restrictions, Jews kept coming to Venice because it was a city where they had more privileges than other places, where they could perhaps be a doctor, a merchant, a lawyer, a businessman. And so we see Jews coming from Germany here and establishing a synagogue. Alas, they could not establish a synagogue that could be seen. It was forbidden to build new synagogues. And so they took an old building in the ghetto and they refurbished the top 2 floors to make a lavish and beautiful synagogue. This disparity between what is inside and outside is perhaps a very fitting metaphor for being a Jew throughout times, but especially at modern times. One of the most important models we have at the synagogue gallery is the Tlumacka, the great synagogue of Warsaw, Poland. This synagogue, opened in 1878, was the largest synagogue at the time in the largest Jewish metropolis, Warsaw. It served the elite of the community, those Polish and German Jews enjoying emancipation, becoming doctors, bankers, lawyers, and whatever they could with the newfound rights they had. The synagogue could hold thousands of people, but this was still just a minority of the community, those who could afford the seats. This raised some protest in the Jewish community of the time, and during the high holidays, there were several back benches that were saved for those of less means. The community thrived until 1939. With the invasion of Nazi Germany, the rabbi of the community, Senator Professor Rabbi Moses Shore, realizes where the tide is heading, and he starts burying artifacts from the synagogue on synagogue grounds. Through his diplomatic connections, he manages to sell several of the artifacts to a Swedish family. In May of 1943, following the Warsaw Ghetto Revolt, the German army comes to this synagogue and destroys it completely. It wasn't in the ghetto, but it was a symbol of Judaism for them, and so they wanted to show what happens if you revolt against the Nazis. 20 years later, the young Israeli nation receives a phone call from Sweden. We have something we would like you to have. And that is how the menorah came to Israel. This menorah, one of a pair of menorahs that stood on each side of the ark, was saved by the rabbi, sent to Sweden, and finally rests here at the Museum of the Jewish People. The Toro Synagogue of Newport, Rhode Island, is the oldest synagogue in the U.S. today. Built in the 18th century, it was established by a Sephardic Jewish community, Jews who were expelled from Spain and Portugal 250 years before then. This is a beautiful synagogue built in the style of the time, but being fearful of something happening to them, underneath the bima there is a trap door leading to a secret chamber. Not long after this synagogue was built, their worst fears were realized. There was a revolution, and all of a sudden, they no longer lived in a colony and abided by the king's rules, but lived in a state and abided by the president's laws. George Washington wasn't just the first president of the United States, he was the first president ever. And so, in 1791, when as part of his tour of the states, he arrives at Rhode Island, this small community sends him a letter asking him, begging him to respect them and to let them continue and worship God in the way that they see fit. George Washington answers this letter by saying, "I cannot grant you that which is not mine to give." Here in the United States, he explains, there is religious freedom. They can do whatever they want as long as they don't harm other people. This letter is one of the most important letters in American Jewish history. 1 year before the Bill of Rights, it establishes freedom of religion in the United States. To this day, each year, the letter and the letter back are read. Welcome to Let There Be Laughter, Jewish humor around the world. We build this exhibition, which portrays Jewish humor in different times and places, with the understanding that the story of the Jewish people is many times, at the end of the day, a funny story. Humor helped us throughout the years as a survival and defense mechanism, but also as a tool for keeping tradition and customs. The inner codes that developed in the Levant and Maghreb also developed in Galicia and Ashkenaz. In these galleries, we will learn about Jewish history and culture, and also about our ability to view everything as laughter through tears. Come with me. So, what happened to Jewish humor from North Africa, from Eastern Europe, when it came to the shores of the US and to Israel? In this gallery, we deal with archetypes. What does humor deal with? What does Jewish humor deal with? With understanding what Jewish humor talks about, we can actually understand what Jewish people were upset with, what had they to contend with, what dilemmas and questions they had. So we see the community, we see faith, we see holidays, we see family, we see Jews and non-Jews. These are the main topics that Jews deal with throughout our unique and ongoing story. United States, between 1882 and 1924, more than 2.4 million Jews arrived at the gates of the country. Most of them at the East Coast, most of them in New York, most of them in Manhattan, which was then more densely populated than Mumbai and India or any other place in the world. In order to escape those stifling New York apartments, where sometimes 3 or 4 families lived, they went outside. They wanted entertainment. They wanted something to do. And this is where vaudeville is born, on street corners, in basements. This Jewish industry was there to supply entertainment for all of the people who wanted them. A generation passes. It's the 1930s and 1940s. Jews are more affluent. They've risen the social ladder and are starting to arrive in the American dream. And now they have their own apartments, and during the stifling New York summer, they want to go to the country clubs. The only problem is, the country clubs won't have them. Anti-Semitic and anti-Irish sentiment at the time is the highest in history, and clubs won't accept Jews. So Jewish communities do what they usually do in those circumstances, and they establish their own, the Borscht Belt. And here, the Borscht Belt, stand-up is born, when us boys and aides and staff are asked to stand up on stage during lunch and tell jokes to hundreds of people while they're eating. This is where Mel Brooks, Danny King, and an entire generation of comics is born. These are also the years where they break out and arrive at the American dream. Everyone knows their names. But this generation, like many other creators on Broadway and comics and TV and Hollywood, don't talk much about their Jewish identity. And if they do, it's in a self-deprecating way. They want to be part of America. They don't want to point any fingers at it. This all changes with Lenny Bruce. Political and biting, Lenny Bruce puts Jewish identity at the forefront. He uses Yiddish, he uses curse words. He says that being Jewish is cool, and being Goyish is square. Part of the Beat generation, Lenny Bruce has no qualms talking about Jewish identity, culture, the problem there are in it, the problem Gentiles have, anything else he wants to talk about. Vaudeville, stand-up, the Borscht Belt, these paved the way for American Jews to be a dominant force in the American humor industry. And this is when we come full circle. The most successful sitcom of all time is like where we started, in a New York apartment. Only now it doesn't have 3 or 4 immigrant families in it. It has one stand-up comedian, Jerry Seinfeld, and the entire country, the entire world, is invited into the apartment to see what he makes of life and to see a show that ran for a decade about nothing. So, what happens to Jewish humor when the Jewish state is born? Humor, like always, changes with the time. And a new phenomenon is born, unique to Israel. Humor adati, humor about people's Jewish communities and origins of the past. Laughing about customs, about accents, about different attributes of the communities. Trying through humor to reconcile and establish a new society with all of those different people coming at one time and place. An example of that humor is Luba. Luba is a rendition of a former Soviet Jew coming to Israel and working as a cashier, while many Sabras, many native-born Israeli Jews, consider Luba to be a welcoming figure and think of her as part of the acceptance of former Soviet Union Jews into Israeli society. Actually, many former Soviet Union Jews think of her as an offensive figure. And this is something we always need to consider thinking about humor. When are we actually giving a hug? When are we going for an embrace and for being together? And when are we hurting the person we're laughing at, with, or about? Thank you for being with us. We hope you log on to our website, see more of our tours, use our online databases, but most importantly, we hope that once this is all over, we get to see you face to face. So thanks again, and hope you come back. Goodbye.